Okay, so basically, what we're talking about, or what I'm going to be talking about today, is the emerging evolutionary shift towards connected communities. This whole thing is basically enabled by the creation or the existence of the World Wide Web and IoT. Uh, and uh, and if we're going to be able to get this done, as we were discussing there a few minutes ago, if we could go to the next slide, I think it's really poignant. There is something that's really critical that is fundamental to being able to get folks to be willing to listen and to drop the guard, because folks, and justifiably so, are sometimes a bit cautious about what they hear, and what they're really asking themselves is it the truth? And if people can understand that is a conditioned precedent in the person conveying that message, then it makes it a lot stronger. And I think that the other things that are associated with the four-way test, which any of you that are Rotarians will recognize immediately, is that it breaks down the barriers to communication and collaboration. And these are the critical issues to being able to really mobilize all of the goodwill and all of the excitement for this truly evolutionary step. And I think that this new platform as an area of focus and action for Rotary is exemplified by that emerging reality. So if we can go to the next slide. So where I come from is Cape Cod. I was born there, and I've been here forever, really. The image in this slide is actually a mooring barge, which puts out the moorings for the vessels. And what you see it attached to is a rock marker that's also a monitoring platform that monitors atmospherics and oceanographic characteristics. This rock had always been there. It was the nemesis of many a boater in the bay. And myself and some associates got together and decided it was time to put something there to make sure nobody ran into it again. And so we put that up, and we've been collecting real-time data since early 2000s. And basically what you see behind it is a beetle cat. Now that vessel's lineage starts with the whaling industry. That was the design basically for a lot of the whale boats. And if we look at this whole discussion, what we're really talking about is making a transition from fossil fuels, which were the next level from whaling, as far as powering our world and providing the lubricants essential for the industrial revolution. Our nonprofit was put together in order to be able to figure out what was going on, because I grew up on this bay, and I was seeing changes, having been diving since I was a kid. When it was pristine, it was something remarkable, and now it's not, and that's what put me on the path that I'm on. And I've been on this path for, coming up on 30 years now. So that's our organization. It's a nonprofit. If you go to it, you'll find some interesting stuff that kind of lays out some issues associated with coastal communities pretty much anywhere along the coast of the world today. So next slide. Now, what the research has kind of brought forth, and actually I have some kind of interesting background checkpoints. I was involved in bringing about the current offshore wind scenario off of Cape Cod. And as a result of that, I actually worked with Clinton administration and NOAA and Department of Energy, and at that time it was a project called Ocean Ranching, which was an integrated platform of open ocean aquaculture and integrated offshore renewable energy. The idea of synergistics was really the approach, and basically that got me into NOAA and into access to some of these false color imagery that really well demonstrate what's going on out there. And what this image shows is ground level CO2 intensity, which is basically, that's where the pollution's coming from. Now, I call your attention to the fact that the winds are westerly. So anything that happens on the continental United States basically is coming my way. And I have to tell you that that neither the coastal ocean nor the air can really put up with this any longer. So this is a call to support this stuff and for us to start turning the corner on what's going on with climate change. Next slide, please. So how are we going to do this? What are we going to, why do we do it? Again, kind of relates to Rotary in many ways, but what we really need to do is get to regeneration. And what does that mean? Well, that means restoring the balance of life on the planet that has been disrupted by our activities. And again, I call your attention to the whaling industry, which, you know, as somebody from Cape Cod and friends and relatives on Nantucket, you can't really gripe too much about it because it's what made this area sort of a world-class place. But we owe a debt to our oceans and our world to sort of do this. Now, restoring the ecological diversity is what I'm talking about there. And we've got to move beyond the concept of exploitation and move towards a more renewable, regenerative platform. It simply has to happen. We have no choice. Now, what we're really talking about gaining by way of a benefit collateral to that is that by doing that and by embracing those kinds of principles, we're going to end up moving towards more resilient communities. Now, resiliency has to become a community. Now, earlier before the presentation here, we were chatting about different things, and I had a tornado or tornadic system come right over the house yesterday, and Mina was talking about Category 1 typhoon or coming through her area, just approaching now. It's critical that we get our arms around this. Now, resiliency also deals with food and water, and these are critical issues today, particularly in light of the COVID and some of the things that have been surfacing as a result of understanding the incredibly long logistics chains that much of what we consume require. And it's causing us to rethink things in a number of different ways. And as we're doing this, we're starting to recognize that one of the key areas that we really have to focus on is resilience in our energy profile. And again, that transition could help us to mitigate the carbon footprint that is responsible for much of the climate response that we're seeing. And in our development, our activities, our developed world is largely the problem, and we've got to pivot to a focus that's more regenerative and resilient, but more sustainable. And what we're really sort of shining the light on there is responsibility. We've created the problem. We've created the problem for us. We have the responsibility to the future and to the other life on the planet to do something about it. And we've got to do it now. Next slide. So connected communities, how does that help to facilitate this overall dynamic? Well, I'm taken by the water in this image, and if I were to analyze that and say, geez, where was that picture taken? I would say that it's off of a Pacific island, maybe Guam, about 4 feet of water. That's Pacific blue. Anyway, that polygon that you see there is what I like to refer to as a polygon of resiliency. And basically what we're talking about is all of these things need to be connected and need to be integrated in our approach to being able to solve the problem. And what that means is that our connected communities have to connect water and wastewater, and be looking at water reuse as a critical function of our overall dynamic, because without that, we're in trouble. Looking at food and urban agriculture as well as conventional agriculture, because again, we've got to reestablish local food resources and the importance of local agricultural activity, both as a source of more resilient food supply, but also because those green spaces are critical to the quality of life in any community. Energy. Energy is going through a major transition, as is much of the infrastructure industry. And it's moving from the concept of bigger is better, and the biggest thing you can build is what you want to do, and then just put pipes going everywhere you need them to go. Well, it's not effective, because what ends up happening is that T&D, that ability to be able to get it from point A to point B, becomes overburdening. So distributed renewable energy and district energy is going to have to become a fundamental element as well. I mentioned the built environment. That does not just stop at infrastructure. That goes all the way through the building, and the building becomes what is known as smart, which means that it is sensing in real time. Now, that built environment is also going to need to employ the infrastructure associated with your community, and public safety is basically the thing that's associated with that. That's your public conveyances, you know, roads, street lights, all that sort of thing. And again, smart, renewable energy powered built environment is critical. Now, the final element, which is almost the final element, is the Internet of Things that I mentioned earlier. That gives, that is the nerve fiber that connects the community. That's the ability to be able to have the nerves that are sensing what's going on throughout the community and reporting it so that it's able to be dealt with, but also a way of being able to establish a communications link. 5G, Wi-Fi, the ability to communicate is critical to being able to participate in our future world. So it has to be fundamental to the core of infrastructure being developed. The other element that is real high profile and actually very exciting right now is transportation and the transition to electric and alternative fuel vehicles to be able to mitigate that transportation-based CO2 production. Because if you look at that map, that was the carbon dioxide concentration, most of that is probably transportation or power plant based. So we need to do something there, and building the electric vehicle in, and particularly the autonomous electric vehicle or transportation medium, then connects that transportation system to the IoT, to the connected community. And that's where things really start to get exciting and dynamic. Next slide, please. Okay, so what's my special sauce? What do I do? Well, I've been involved, as I said, in ocean science and stuff for a long time. And if you're a coastal community member who is a scuba diver, then you probably figured out something called eutrophication, which is the result of the nutrient loading of the waste that we're disposing into the ocean, which is causing basically the same thing that happens if you over-fertilize a plant. It just goes like crazy. For the longest time, the research center was engaged in trying to figure out how to mitigate algae blooms and that sort of thing. It was a problem. And I had an epiphany one day, and I realized, wait a minute, this is Mother Nature. Mother Nature doesn't do things to punish. Mother does things to balance things. So what I realized was that this algae was really just the natural system trying to adapt to the problems that the humans were creating. So the algae is a byproduct. Decided, well, geez, if that's the case, then why not use it in removing it before? And that's what we did, and that's what this basically is we use a membrane bioreactor to separate down to the molecular level. We then feed that through hydroponics and algae photobioreactor. It strips out all the nutrients, puts oxygen in the water, strips out CO2. Then we use that highly oxygenated water to invigorate hydroponic growing. Now, the basic profile of what one of these these integrated platforms is that involves wind, solar, and other infrastructure as a unified package, so that you're not just doing one thing at a time, you're doing a system. And that's really important from a standpoint of the economics and getting the best value out of the dollar that we spend. So not all of the projects that that we do include everything that I'm talking about here, but most of them do. Next slide. So this gives you kind of an idea of the net result. Advanced H2O treatment, the wastewater treatment, creating an ability to be able to convert those commercial and residential discharges into an alternative water supply. Algae again polishes both the CO2 from the waste process, the waste treatment process, and also it provides oxygen for the overall process, which reduces the energy profile. The membrane-based process, as I said, we installed our first recycling system in 1993 for a commercial laundry center, turned it into a zero discharge facility, really kind of wild. Operated really well until a couple of years ago. We bought the facility. We're going to redo it as a core for a village sustainability thing. Anyway, so the reused water is used in algae biotech and urban farming operations, which then produce food and eliminate the need for potable water, which is again a critical thing. The greenhouse operations are actually, if you look at that image in the upper right, that's actually a demonstration project outside of Perth, Australia, I believe, outfit called Clearview Solar. They've got clear glass that actually is a photovoltaic panel. So your greenhouse becomes an energy platform. And so you've got some interesting dynamics from a standpoint of how your overall economics work out there. As far as the greenhouse is concerned, it's essential to the algae photobioreactor, but at the same time we install vertical wall, the vertical farming, and on your left there you can see the algae blend tank. That vortex is formed by the process, which is one of the sequential steps in it. You can see on the plants are actually tomato plants. Greenhouse produces about 220 pounds of those a day, and what you see below that vortex is butter lettuce, and because you're using a highly oxygenated water flow, the plant root gets the oxygen, and oxygen is essential to both the plant's health, but also its uptake of nutrients. So what we found is that you don't end up with any leaf burn. You end up with a faster cycle rate between planting and harvest, and a much more really tender and tasty scenario. So that greenhouse becomes part of the distributed microgrid, which is part of the distributed energy supply. Okay, so next slide. Basically, what you see here are what was, as far as a wastewater treatment plant, on the upper picture, and what is a wastewater treatment plant below. Number one, the thing that can really kind of gets your attention is that, well, these guys are inside of a small building. Yeah, that's exactly right. The small building houses one of these membrane units. Up above, what you see is a normal wastewater plant. Those circular tanks are what they call settling basins, primary and secondary. So that gets all the solids to kind of settle out, and they use, just the ability of gravity to settle things out. Yeah, by the time it gets to the last one, it's relatively free of suspended solids, and then it goes through the aeration system. Well, that whole thing is eliminated by this process below, because you only have one tank, and the membrane is responsible for that. So that's where that goes. Actually, we did that plant. That small facility was able to treat 1 million gallons a day, and the original building that was in treated 90,000. So you can see the differential there. So by using the membrane, you end up with an alternative water resource, and depending upon the water source, that can be quite significant. And then if you've got a large enough facility, then you can turn that organic waste into energy. It's all connected by the Internet of Things once again, so that it's part of that smart community. And as a system, then you end up with the benefit of co-location, which ends up giving you synergistic opportunities. And that digitization means that you are living in real time versus living in forensic time. In other words, the way that a present system works is that people sample and they try to figure out how things were. By the time they get the results, they were, and things can have happened this way. It's a much more efficient process. Next slide, please. Okay, once again, the reason for that process is to effectuate this process. Again, the butter lettuce and the photobioreactor, this is the lab itself, and you can see the photobioreactor, which is that glowing vertical wall, and the aquaponics and hydroponics over there to the left. So what ends up happening is that as you develop communities, or as you're looking at projects that you're doing, look at what is possible. Look at building integrated opportunities, bringing in green space to areas where it might not currently be. Look to fully integrate what you're talking about, because you'll find opportunities for savings and additional process benefits by doing it. We need to establish a more secure local food supply, at least in the US, and I think it's pretty well global. And we also need to transition to a circular economy. If you look at everything that I'm talking about, one of the real values of the circular economy is what they refer to as the velocity of the money in the local economy. So in everything that you saw what I was doing here, what I was doing was taking a local resource and basically utilizing that and finding value out of it. Those value propositions then come back into the local economy. So if you look at that, you're talking about multiple yields in the overall value of a dollar spent. So instead of it being like a rock skipping across the surface of a pond and it's off into the International Monetary Fund, it stays in the economy. So that dollar becomes $2 or $3 or $5, depending upon the value velocity in the local economy. That's a benefit to the local economy. It's a benefit in circular dynamics, which is critically important that we do. And again, from a circular standpoint, we're taking and we're reusing as much as possible, sometimes as much as 3 or 4 times. And that's not impossible. And if we look at what that really means from a standpoint of the burden of humankind on our planetary systems, that's going to be critical and in no uncertain terms. So if we can go to the next slide. Again, this will give you an idea of what I was talking about from a standpoint of the available water in a school. And we've done a number of different schools that were challenged by the environment that they were built in and not being able to deal with the wastewater. Well, in a school or an office or a retail site, as much as 90%, 95% of that water can be reused. And so if you look at that, and it's somewhat amazing, you know, a 100,000 gallon a day facility drops down to 10. You know, those are huge dynamics. In a residential application, 40% of the total wastewater flow is potentially can be used as a reuse stream. And that's in the use pattern, not in the available resource, because the available resource probably ends up in the 90%. It's just getting it back to the available use. Then if we look at this and we apply this to industrial, agricultural, site irrigation, and again, the drinking water, the impact of our communities in our society on the hydrology of our planet is going to have make a difference, and it's going to be beneficial. Next slide, please. Okay, the last element of the overall connected community, the Jenga piece, as far as I'm concerned, is the transition to distributed local renewable energy. As I mentioned, I was working on Cape Wind, and that was 20 years ago. And at that time, we were still firmly in the matrix of the bigger is better. Okay, and what's happened is that we're going through this transition, and in the energy marketplace, it's basically being driven by the issue of climate, but it's also being driven by technology. The same technology curve that the IoT is on is basically pushing renewable energy. And I can tell you something, because as I said, I've been at this for well over 20 years, that there is something special going on right now, and this plank is part of it. And there is another thing that's going on, and I'm going to allude to it here. That the reason I can talk about this intelligently and I can say, yep, it works, is that I've done it. The recycling of the water, as I said, plain vanilla as far as I'm concerned. This building on the top here is about a 10,000 square foot steel commercial building. The top of the roof, as you see there, is photovoltaics. If you look over to the right, just barely see it, you can look, and there's kind of a white shipping container. Those are batteries, backup battery system. And if you look just over there on the edge of the parking lot up to the left, those are electric vehicle charging stations. And then that is a nanogrid. And that in itself is kind of what we're talking about from a standpoint of looking at things as a systemic approach rather than in isolation, because you lose a lot by doing that, and you increase cost and inefficiency by also failing to do it. So the picture below that is a large-scale wind energy facility with a large-scale, what they refer to as a best battery system. And what that does is it produces electricity to its maximum capacity, goes into the grid, but it also goes into that battery storage. Then if it's producing excess power, it's stored and used when it's needed. And that fundamentally is what we're talking about as where things are going now. I'm not the only guy out there talking about this stuff, obviously, but if you go to the next slide, this is what explains part of what is going on. And Tony Seba and his group, a group called Rethink X, did a real deep dive into the history of human society, really trying to figure out sort of what is the special sauce that happens when major change, disruptive change comes about. And what they found was that it's the convergence of a number of influencing factors that are like a rogue wave. So if you have a normal sea state, the waves are kind of normal, right? Well, a rogue wave happens when the synergy between different waves comes together and becomes giant. Basically the same thing. And what they're saying is that what I just laid out a couple of seconds ago with the batteries and the renewable energy supply in the distributed microgrid is happening now. And it's the same fundamental base that's driving the transition from the fossil fuel to electric vehicle. So if you take that and you take this in its combination, and by the way, if you were to exhibit this, they have an excellent video, and basically what they show is that when the car was invented, I believe it was 1900 or 1901 or something like that. Anyway, they had a picture of Times Square. And Tony Seba asks the folks watching it, pick out the car in this picture. And it's all horses and buggies. And then there's a picture from 1916, just for the sake of conversation, 15 years later. And he said, now pick out the horse. And you couldn't, because it was all cars. That is where we're at right now. Okay. What is happening with Rotary International is an element of this transitional force that's now taking hold, and it's critically important to the momentum, and we have a very important role to play. Next slide, please. So this is the connected community. It is, call it an amassed data from individual remote sensors that are in real time. And this works. I mean, you know, it just works. We've been doing it since the early 2000s and the Lewis Bay stuff, and it's just amazing what you find out. But as you can see here, it's a system. It's integrated, and the way that this works is that it works both ways. So the energy can either go to the grid or it can come back from the grid. It can create it can eliminate the need for those giant power plants, you know, at the end of that great big transmission line. And that's part of what this whole thing is about. I can't get into the details of either the water or the energy today, but suffice it to say that underlying this smart grid is a smart water system. Okay, and in that smart water system and the smart wastewater system is the answer to the smart community, and that's really what the connected community represents. Okay, next slide, please. Now this goes all the way down to the dwelling level, and this is the stuff that's available now. So now as we move forward into this 21st century reality, this stuff has to be part of our reality. This has to be part of what we are doing as a standard operating process. Next slide. Now, as I said, this goes down to the infrastructure level, and normally, you know, if you look at streetlights, normally streetlights, you'd view them and say, okay, yeah, that's important public service stuff, you know, public safety and all that sort of thing, and it is, but it's more than that in the 21st connected community, and that means that these other looking poles that you see there, those are actually photovoltaic independent standalone items that are light poles, but they also are 5G Wi-Fi transmission points and telemetry points, and they also have sensor packs, so that those light poles are now able to sense or pick up data, and that might be temperature, it might be the CO2 content, it might be ground level ozone, it might be noise, and including gunshots and stuff like that. If you're looking at autonomous vehicles, that's the key. This is the key, because it's the communications capacity to be able to control the vehicle as it moves from zone to zone that's going to make it all work. And that's part of the transition. Now, the good news about it is that you don't have an electric bill. You know, that's pretty cool. And it gives you the ability to sort of provide sort of the ability to be able to pick up from remote sensors as part of that overall telemetry network. So next slide, please. This is a project that I'm directly involved in, and it's a school system down on Cape Cod, regional school system. Strangely enough, it's where I graduated, which is a very scary thing. That image in the lower right is the regional high school. Graduated from there in '71, and I was an Interact member, by the way, at that school. Now, up above there, you see kind of a crude image that's been penciled in there. I did that. And that's a new middle school that's being built. And as a result of building the new middle school, what we're going to end up doing is creating a net zero eco-campus. That eco-campus is going to be designed as a demonstration, of course, as to the technology that we can get to, but all of the technology actually becomes a living laboratory for the community, so that the students that are matriculating there, and there's a elementary school, a middle school, and a high school, all three are on the same campus. Those kids are introduced to this topic and these issues at a very early age. And it progresses through their education. So by the time they graduate from their high school, they understand recycling water, they understand renewable energy, they understand the smart grid, they understand all this stuff. Now that's cool for them. But how about all of us other guys? You know, where here we are, you know, at the transition point into the 21st century reality, and we've got a whole great suite of 20th century knowledge and capacity, but we're going to be in that new world. Well, the idea is to create a Center for Lifelong Learning out of this as well, so that it becomes a core for the community, and it's not just the kids that benefit from it. By having the infrastructure cluster as this community school, now it actually has the capacity to be able to sewer the area around the school. So that's a real benefit. Now, this is the first phase of the project, and this is a photovoltaic agricultural laboratory that will hold a photobioreactor and hydroponics operations, all powered by the photovoltaic building itself. This is something that we're doing now as the first phase of that project. And then as the new school comes on board, you see the wastewater treatment plant up above there. That's going to be upgraded and integrated into the overall dynamic. So that becomes sort of the center. It's right off the science wing and by the observatory there. So it's a really exciting project. I felt that it was really important. I'm a Rotarian. I do everything by the four-way test. And it's my belief that this needs to happen, but that it isn't something that just has to happen here. This is something that needs to be open and copied and replicated, particular to the particular location, but it needs to be replicated because we need to make this transition quickly. And if we're not doing it with our kids and giving people the opportunity to learn and understand, then we're never going to make it. And I'm quite nervous by the signs that I'm seeing that if we don't make this transition, it's not going to be a good thing. So next slide. This is again the IoT stuff. Everything is connected. It allows us to have real-time situational awareness, and that has so many important implications that you can't get into it right now. It gives you proactive community resilience. In other words, you're in the driver's seat. You're not reacting to everything coming at you. It can create fully autonomous communities, which means that you get into AI, and now the system's running the system. You know, we support it. If we really want to get to that local circular dynamic, then the topic of cryptocurrency has to come into it, because you have ways of being able to create alternative value exchange that doesn't necessarily fit the normal conventional process. And as I said, this gives you the ability to have the eco-awareness that had we had that 50 years ago, we wouldn't be here talking about this today. But we are, because we didn't, and now we have to. And that's the bottom line. So next slide. Again, electric vehicles, dramatic impact. And this is going to be our reality if you're not into it yet, but there are benefits to it. The vehicles will go for 1 million miles. That's a heck of a thing. You don't have oil. You don't have to change the oil. Most of the cost of running the internal combustion engine is associated with its self-destructive tendencies. This is eliminated by the electric vehicle. And then if everybody's driving these, and our bus fleets and everything else, speaking of the school, are electric, then when they're not being driven, they're a battery storage unit. So this is the gateway to our future. Next slide, please. Now, back to the future. This slide, or these two slides, are important. Now, the slide on the right actually is me. That's my boat, the Goodspeed. And that was on a shakedown cruise last year. Now, she's old, as you can tell by the dead eyes and you know, all the manual rigging. But what I'm going to show you here, and the reason that this picture, and I didn't put this in, by the way, Chris was responsible for that. If you look ahead there, and if you're a sailor, you can tell that I'm reaching into the wind, okay? She's heeling a bit, and if you look forward there, what you can really see is a little thing sticking up there. That's the light at the end of the Hyannisport breakwater. Now, I got an interesting story to that. If you go back just a little bit from that, right where the pointer was there a second ago, right there. No, a little bit more, back, up, more back over. You're right there. Okay, you see those two, it's evenly spaced. There are two gaps in the breakwater there. About 3 years ago, 4 years ago now, the ferry coming back from Nantucket, I guess one of the crew members wasn't paying attention, and he mistook the breakwater beacon for the mid-channel marker. Those two missing blocks on that breakwater were knocked out by the catamaran. So anyway, long and short of it is that if I can't reach further up into the wind, I'm not going to make it past that breakwater. I'm going to be in the same plight as that ferry was. And so anybody who sails know that, you know, that's a tight situation. Either that or I'm going to have to tack. That scenario is where we are at right now. We need to make it past that damn breakwater if we're going to save the future of our planet. And I'm not saying this myself again. I believe it and I've been living it. But Rotary International has decided that this needs to be done. And we are the ones doing it. So that's what this is about. We need to be able to collaborate with everybody all over the world to make it happen. That's what that picture of the hands together, because that's what it's going to take. And if you go back to that second slide, the other thing that it's going to take is people that really believe in that four-way test and are willing to put their heart on the line to make it happen. This is a pivotal time. This is a desperate time in no uncertain terms, but this is the biggest opportunity the human race has ever faced. And it's an ability to pivot from something that is somewhat of a pariah to being the stewards of the future that we really need to create. So next slide. There it is. That little arrow points to where I am and what I'm doing. And it's going to take everybody else all over that globe to do what they can do to make it happen. And if we all get together and we do what we can do and we share what we do, then we're going to make it. And this is the most important time in human history. That's what the guys from Rethink X are saying. That's what I feel. Those two folks that were talking about the meditation earlier on, you know, that's where you find the center. It's where the answers are. And I know. So help me with this.